Hello friends of YouTube, welcome back to Mike Reads the World. Today we're talking about Catch the Rabbit by Lana Bastašić. That's my best attempt at that pronunciation. And it is translated from Serbo-Croatian by the author into English. So if you read it in English, it's almost not even like reading a translation because the author practically had to write it twice in two languages. So that's very interesting. She was originally born in Croatia, but moved to Bosnia Herzegovina at a very young age. So she is a fine choice to count for that country, which I am doing for the Reading Around the World project. And I've never been that concerned about getting it exactly right, the exact book to represent the exact country. It's about reading great literature across time and space. And I haven't abandoned or given up on modern literature, although I've struggled to enjoy a lot of the modern books that I've tried more so than the older ones that are like well-known classics in their respective countries and around the world. This one, however, I feel, despite my apprehensions and some difficulties with it, I felt the ending really delivered and moved it to me into what I would call good literature. And or just literature, just capital L literature, because it was good. It was great. The end is one of those that just made me want to turn back to the beginning of the book and start it again. And it definitely just changed my viewpoint of the whole story. That being said, I think the less you know about this book going into it, the better. I even feel I may have said too much with that last statement. But yeah, the less you know about it, the better. If it's one that sounds interesting to you, I'll give you the basic setup of how it starts. So we have our narrator, Sarah, who is living in Dublin with her boyfriend, a pretty normal life. They have an avocado tree growing in their living room that they barely water, but her boyfriend gives it water and it's barely alive, kind of the sickly zombified thing, a perfect representation of their relationship. But the book actually opens with her walking down the streets of Dublin, getting a call from her friend Lejla. It's the pronunciation I'm going to go with, or Layla. I'll say Layla, it's more natural for me. And this friend calls her, and she hasn't spoken to her in 10 years, and says, I need to get from point A in Bosnia to point B, which is Vienna in Austria, because Armin is there. And Armin, as you'll find out shortly, is supposedly Layla's brother. But I think there's a lot more going on with Armin, and even after paging through the book and trying to figure it out, I still haven't quite figured it out. So that's a mystery to unravel in the book as well. There is, again, I say the less you know about this, the better. So if at any point in the video you're interested, I would just go read the book. I'm gonna not try to get, if I plan to give any big spoilers, I will make sure to warn you before that happens, or give a hard cutoff point. So yeah, this Layla, Sarah obviously is not very completely content with her life in Dublin, and one of my misgivings about the novel at first is it's there's just so many of these modern novels that one are like this introspective, self-absorbed musings about things, and I think it's on point that at one point early in the novel there's a poetic reference to one of Fernando Pessoa's heteronyms, Alvaro de Campos, and actually a poem taken from his work in the book. So for those of you who love Fernando Pessoa, that's something to watch for, and it's an influence. But again, I think, yeah, I kind of had that feeling reading Fernando Pessoa's work as well, that for my taste, it can be a bit too self-absorbed, right? But I had a great internal discussion with that book and grew a lot from reading the Book of Disquiet. So I'm not meaning to belittle the work of Fernando Pessoa or this author in any way. It's just that there's so many of these modern novels that just this self-absorbed introspection, and then you add that to the fact that it's like yet another novel about somebody who leaves their home country and is returning and has all these complications with that. It just gets to be this like this internal merry-go-round of identity crisis and self-absorption that just, to me, is a downward spiral and can just end up very nihilistic and very cynical and doesn't really go anywhere. But why this book is great is because I think just about better than any other, it gave me the sense that it has a self-awareness of that cycle. And you're only going to really understand what I mean by that when you get to the end. And I interpret, or I think, that this book is partly showing the problematic nature of getting caught up in that cycle of constantly trying to understand your self-identity, constantly like reflecting on moments of the past that are frozen in your mind in time and eternity. And it shows, and the book itself is a struggle with that, and also I think shows how in many ways how the nature of our modern world and individualism and all this thing, it, like, maybe I'm just rambling nonsense here, this is just what I got out of the book personally, shows how this cycle is really something you get trapped in, and the book allows you to grapple to try to figure your own way out of it and draw your own conclusions on it, much in the same way I think that Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy doesn't give you the answers, but forces you as the reader to enter into combat with the book and kind of solve its problems on your own. But it gives you the tools to do so, and it leaves certain things open-ended for you to put yourself in the book. I think this book achieves that level of interactivity on part of the reader. That was a long way to say it, but anyway, Sarah ends up going back to Bosnia with Layla, and to me, both of these women are not particularly sympathetic or likable characters, and I think that's somewhat intentional. And some of the things you dislike are probably things you can see in yourself, but it's just there's a very pervasive negative outlook on life coming from the narrator, and while Layla isn't quite as self-absorbed and negative, she is reckless, and she's selfish, and doesn't really consider other people besides herself. So they're both just dislikable in their own ways. And but the book follows kind of their friendship and their road trip together. I guess you could call it adult road trip, reconnecting after 10 years, driving through Bosnia. And a lot of it's one of those books that takes mundane situations that they run into along the way and in their past memories, and kind of gives them epic proportions, or maybe not epic proportions, but kind of fantasy, childlike fantasy, a dark childlike fantasy proportions to them. Again, Alice in Wonderland, but kind of a more twisted and dark version, to use the comparison that's on the book cover. So that is, the book was a lot actually darker than I expected, especially from the cover and what it was supposed to be. It went to much darker places than I expected, and again, that was part of my misgivings with it. It's how much more do I need to read about people wallowing in their own misery, right? I'm just so thankful that at least this book's end delivered in a way that again gave me the tool I needed to grapple with the wallowing in the misery that this book does, and that the end of it gives the reader a perspective on the sort of the vicious cycle of all of that. So again, I'm trying to present, like, why is this book impactful? Why was it powerful to me? Why did I, at the end of it, go back to the beginning and just like start searching through for clues about what happened? I mean, there are like at one point in the book. Now I'm gonna start spoilers, okay? So if you're interested in this book, I feel I've said enough to get somebody thinking like, oh, do I want to try this or not? Now I'm going to start elevating a little bit with some spoilers, because so this is for people who've already read it. Please go if you don't want to hear this, and thank you for watching the video. But there's a part later in the book that some dogs start dying. Someone's poisoning the dogs, and this brother Armin of Layla then disappears, and there's some people who think he's connected to poisoning the dogs. That whole part of the book is like this big mystery to me. And then there's another scene where there's like a seance, and Armin like appears and disappears. So like when I went back in this book, I'm thinking like, does Armin even exist? And I'm looking at different things that people said about Armin, and like no one ever really says his name directly except the narrator. And then I was playing around with theories like, wait, are Layla and Sarah the same person? And so even this stuff, like, even though I gave a spoiler warning, I am talking about some things that happen in the book. I haven't figured out the mystery of this book, and that's why I want to like probably go back and reread it again, because like my mind was just going off on like the end made me realize that, one, this book is like a lot more like cerebral and more surreal than I gave it credit for going through. And that also made me start re-examining everything else in the book. And I realized as I was scanning through the book the second time, I realized all of these little details that I was missing, like when, part of the name of the book is connected to a rabbit that dies. Layla's rabbit. One of the first memories we get of Layla and Sarah is them burying the rabbit that Layla has. Her rabbit dies, and it's just snuck in there. There's one word that it's not said that the rabbit was poisoned, but then it says poisoned rabbit. And it's like that was just taken for granted the first time I read it, because I'm like, oh, maybe they'll explain it later. But it's never explained later. Who poisoned the rabbit? Why? And earlier in the book, there were all these poisoned dogs. So did Layla do that? Is Layla the murderer? Then there was like somebody who showed up in the river murdered with their, a guy with his what cut off. And it's like, did Layla do that? I don't know. Did Armin do that? Who's Armin? Who's Layla? Like, all of these things, the way the book is, like, you read it the first time and everything superficially kind of seems like it's a realist novel. But then after the end, which is a bit surreal in itself, you go back and you start realizing there's all this stuff in the book that could be like, that's just snuck in there. There's one part where Sarah, the author, says like, she sees the ghost of a dog that was poisoned walking around, and it's just snuck in there. You don't even like, the first time I read it, I just didn't even realize that. And it's like reading the book a second time is literally like reading a different book. And that in my mind is a great book. Like, so thank you to this author for renovating a little bit my faith in modern literature, because I was really starting to struggle with having to read more modern stuff. But it's great to see that and for myself, because I like to write too. So it's nice to think that not all the great stuff has already been written, and that we can still do interesting things with literature. I mean, it could be that somebody else reads this and says like, oh, this is similar to something else I read or whatever. But for me, like, this was a new experience, and it was awesome, and pretty much stands as its own thing. It's just that I think part of the problem is that, like, these days when people read something good or great, especially people who have read a lot, maybe, is like they always want to compare it to something else. Sometimes it's better to just say, no, you know, this is Bosnia. This is a specific country, and the problems in the book don't necessarily have to be related to that, but just allow things to be what they are. And like, this is a unique artifact, and I don't need to compare it to anything. So I'm perfectly happy leaving it at that and saying I'm just really curious about like if there's some dark mystery at the heart of this book, because the ending made me think there was, and the mysterious deaths and poisonings of the animals and different things that happen, and like who's even real in this novel are questions that came up, like, yeah, between Layla and Armin, and then there's of course mentions of Tito, which I think are referring to the Yugoslav longtime leader, but I'll let somebody who's more educated on Yugoslavia talk about that. So I think that's enough for Catch the Rabbit. Just a really, it was a trip. This book was a trip, and I recommend it if you're still watching. I haven't actually spoiled, I think, anything too major, and especially the stuff I'm talking about, you're not even, if you read this, you're probably not even going to connect the dots in the same way I am. Like, the second half of this video probably would only make sense to somebody who's actually read it. So, yeah, great book. I'm not sure exactly what's going to be next, but thank you for watching and following this journey in Mike Reads the World. Today's house plant is going to be the other bonsai that I have. I haven't shown that yet. This is a Chinese money tree is what it was called. So, I don't know, got big leaves. These can grow pretty big, but, you know, it's a bonsai, so it's in a small pot. Yeah. Have a great, weekend, day, whatever. Until next time, take care.